I'm Dave Rubenstein, and I'm the chairman of SP TechCon, which is the SharePoint Technology Conference. And we're here today to talk about SharePoint planning. Microsoft is offering a number of choices these days when it comes to SharePoint. You can license the server, you can upgrade from the version you have to a more recent version, you can license Office 365, or you can have your SharePoint hosted by a third party. And each of those, of course, has their own benefits and drawbacks. And to help us try to make sense of all that today, our SharePoint MVP, Eric Riz, and a SharePoint consultant who runs her own business and is very successful, Susan Hanley. There's Susan. And so we'll just dive right into it and get started. Eric, so let me throw this out to you. How can an organization decide what the best option is for them in terms of SharePoint and where they might want to be with that? Did he not hear me? Eric, can you hear me?
I did not hear you, Dave. Dave, I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
No problem. Let me throw that out to you again. So how can an organization best decide which of the options is the right one for them in terms of SharePoint, whether they want to be online, on-premise, hosted, Office 365? And what's involved in making that decision?
Well, it's a huge decision to be made, whether they go on-prem, whether they go in the cloud, whether they're on 2013 or O365. And unfortunately, what drops off a lot in these conversations is the adoption uptake. People are looking at specific functional points for what they need because they're interested in what they will get out of the system. And the organization is looking at it at a higher level. They're looking at cost, they're looking at what they're going to see end state in a product, and the two concerns are very misaligned as far as what the individual needs, what the user needs, and what the organization needs. So when you're looking at adoption planning, at governance planning, your considerations are going to be data, because the data conversation never really changes. You're always going to be processing and consuming the same information no matter what platform you go with. So the first thing to look at truly is the data. What information are we going to be managing, using, what content are we going to be maintaining, and how can we push the content to make the right business decisions? And from that conversation, then we can graduate into a conversation about which platform is best for us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes sense. Susan, do you have any thoughts on that topic of how organizations can start to make these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do extend the data conversation and also go to what are the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve. You know, what are the scenarios, the use cases that you're trying to enable. And something that I tell my clients today is kind of a given. Microsoft has pretty much clearly given us the direction that all the really cool new features for SharePoint are going to be in the cloud. And so in 2014, if you're about to get into the SharePoint space, I think you have to look at the cloud and say, why not? And see whether or not any barriers to using the cloud are going to be an issue for your organization. Again, aligned with your use cases, because again, depending on what business problems you're trying to solve and how quickly you want to solve them, Microsoft is absolutely pushing people to think cloud first. And so it's definitely a decision that you have to think about.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So, Eric, I know you're a frequent contributor to our weekly e-newsletter, the SP Tech Report, that goes out to our subscribers. And a lot of times you talk about making SharePoint strategic. And is that part of the planning that should go into making a decision about migrating to one platform or another? And how so?
Absolutely. I think the question was around the business decisions that have to be made. And my focus, both from a migration perspective, content perspective, and a process perspective, is always going to be on the business needs. And it's always going to be around the work that needs to get done for the organization. So what does the organization do, and how do they leverage their business processes to complete those tasks? What's critical around this conversation is the non-moving parts. And the non-moving parts in this case is always going to be the data. So if you can identify your data needs from a migration perspective, as well as from an adoption perspective, then you can start yourself off on the right path to long-term success. Now, how we do that, how we look at doing that, how do you bring in the right participants from the business to identify some of those people? That's a very long conversation. The people that you want to meet with are obviously your senior stakeholders. You want to engage at a senior level so that the buy-in is made from a C-level perspective or from a managerial director, vice president perspective. You want to make sure that you have asked your end users what they need so that you end state end up producing something that makes sense for the organization. And you want to start to prepare your plans both from a migration perspective and an adoption perspective and a training perspective. Don't forget training. All of those plans have to be created business first, technology second, and end users have to, of course, be in that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. So I have another question for you. I guess, Eric, you can start, and then we'll throw it to Susan as well. So let's say you have a SharePoint implementation now. You're on a particular platform, and your workers are all in. So does moving to a new platform then kind of put your adoption rate at risk? And conversely, if your workers aren't all in, can having the opportunity to move to a new platform give you a chance to get more buy-in of users? Okay.
So is that to you or to me?
Well, why don't we start with Susan, and then we'll go back to you.
So, I
Okay.
think the answer to the question is, if you are moving to a new platform, you have an opportunity now to introduce change in the organization, to introduce benefits, and sometimes it's easier to get adoption when you're also getting the benefits of a new platform. And so I do have organizations that are trying to figure out the timing of a move to SharePoint 2013 and introducing new functionality or features to their solution. And one way to kind of get some enthusiasm around the change that's going to happen is to offer the great new features of 2013 with whatever new things, new services you're going to be offering or new solutions you're going to offer as part of the change or transition to a new platform solution or upgrade, whatever you're going to do. So I think there's a great opportunity to increase awareness and thereby gain adoption by going to a new platform.
Okay. So let me just throw that over to Eric now and just kind of ask him, is there also the risk of moving to a new platform that people had been comfortable with, and now all of a sudden you're saying go somewhere else, and is there a risk of losing some folks?
To me, the risk question when you go from one platform to another is, the answer to me is very similar to, are you at risk if you go from your existing car to a new car and you go and buy a new car? Are there any additional risks in driving that car versus the original? And of course the answer is no, but what does it boil down to? It's all about usage. If you drive this new car in a more aggressive fashion, then you're more likely to have a problem with it and get into a crash or whatever you might be. From a business perspective, new products and new tools have new opportunities. And if you're able to substantiate the business value and the reasons for what you're going into this new product for, so whether it's 2010 or 2013, whether it's O365 or on-prem or in the cloud, the benefits far outweigh the risks from a technology perspective. So if you're able to create those value statements, if you're able to identify your change management opportunities and the risks that you may run just through change management, you're in a much better position to have a smooth ride with that.
Great. Okay. So Susan, at April's SP TechCon, you delivered a session that you kind of taglined, "Sometimes you have to kiss a few frogs," which was very well received. And I know that involved you talking about some real-world problems that some organizations had that you were working with when they were trying to do some migrations. I was wondering if maybe you could just, very briefly sum up a point or two about the kinds of problems that these organizations were experiencing in their migrations.
Well, in that particular conversation, it was one specific partner of mine. We did this as a joint presentation. to talk about sort of what were the challenges that they had going from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013. And I can tell you right now, the story's not over. We still haven't quite gotten to our happy ending because this is a long, involved process, and change is always hard, even if it's great. And the frogs that we had to kiss in this particular scenario were really about there's really two major things. One is about picking the right development partner. When you're going to a new platform of any technology, it's very likely that you don't have the expertise to get it right the first time. That's why organizations like the ones that Eric and I work for, that's why we exist, to help people. And so this organization had very little experience with SharePoint 2013, so they wanted a partner, but they had a lot of great experience in project management. And they got nervous about whether their experience in managing projects and this new unfamiliar technology were compatible. And as a result, sort of stopped trusting their own instincts about what expectations they should have of their partner. And so the learning was about understanding that project management is project management, and that you can transfer a lot of what you know about managing risk and managing change to SharePoint 2013. Doesn't have to be super scary, and that you should trust your instincts on when something doesn't feel right, it's not right. And learning to question the partner and ask lots of questions. It's really the only way you learn, and the only way and it's a reminder actually that all organizations are made up of people who are not infallible. And so it's really everybody. So learning to create that environment of trust where you're comfortable with trusting your own instincts and learning to trust your partner is absolutely fundamentally critical when you're sharing the load to create organizational change and a real impact on the organization.
Thank you. Eric, you have a point you want to make on that? Oh, I understand we've lost his audio. Hopefully he's working to fix that. So for now, I guess I'll go back to Susan. And just one final question that I have is, you hear stories a lot of people who are saying that SharePoint started in their organization on a project team, or just one little area kind of brought in SharePoint and they were starting to work with it, and then it starts to grow a little bit virally. What does that do in terms of trying to get a handle on planning and implementation and governing and implementation when you have kind of these quote-unquote rogue SharePoint implementations?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. So I tend to look at those things as a positive, and that means that we've got pockets of hopefully positive experience and expertise in a part of the organization. And so what we really have to decide, again, is to go back to the business reasons that we're implementing SharePoint to begin with. What are we trying to accomplish? I often tell people that, you really have to decide, do you really care that all of the content that your rogue, if you want to call it, implementation has produced is accessible to the entire organization? I mean, maybe you don't. And in that case, you don't have to squash everything before you get started. But if there's a broader business objective, then what you're really trying to do is you want to look holistically at what are the outcomes we want to achieve, and where might we have to kind of pull in the reins or adapt an approach to our initial early adopters, and then how best can we take advantage of what they've learned, what they know works, what they know doesn't work, and the use cases that they were able to successfully enable, and how can we use that to translate their success to the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that if I can. So somebody smile if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. This Canadian Wi-Fi that we have up here, it's all over the place. I would add to that and say that rogue implementations, rogue typically has a very negative connotation to it for whatever reason, but rogue doesn't have to be a negative. Rogue can be a positive. The only people who try and attempt rogue implementations are the ones who really can very much become your subject matter expert. They're the ones who feel they have a really great understanding of what the technology can do, and they feel that they have the experience to go down a path for SharePoint. And I've seen many times where a rogue implementation, which was done in 2007 or 2010 or a particular site that was built to facilitate something very specific, it's the best stuff they've built in a year-long implementation. So it's not necessarily a matter of reining them in, it's empowering them and challenging them to be part of the broader picture and assist the project as they start to move themselves forward.
Mm-hmm. Or giving them a little love. I mean, sometimes I found that these rogue implementations are only rogue because IT didn't give them any attention. So throw a little love at them, saying, "Oh my God, we're going to get you this training. We're going to show you how to do it. Gosh, you know, if you could have done it this way, you would have saved tons and tons of time." They're all over it. I mean, it's really a matter of getting recognition for what was an underground kind of solution and bringing it to the forefront and giving it the credit that it deserves.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our time, so I'm just going to ask each of you if you could give me a 30-second or so takeaway about the topic of migration and planning and that kind of stuff, and if there's one thing in particular that you feel that organizations should consider first and foremost, and sum that up in about 30 seconds, that would be great. So let's start with Eric on that one, and then we'll get to Susan. And he might not have heard that.
No, I think I got it. I'm going to try to answer the question that I think you asked, and we'll see how we do. Okay. I think you asked the one thing to look at or to look for on an implementation.
Right. Big takeaway.
Or from a governance, adoption,
migration point of view.
Migration. The thing that I'll point to is business process, and the second thing I'll point to is content. If you have, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Go back to the core, the nature of whatever it is your organization does, and identify the critical business processes that you have created, which are likely manual and likely painful, and see if you can identify working with your IT team on a roadmap, on a strategy, that brings the common practices, the common areas of what your organization does into SharePoint.
Very good. Okay, Susan, final thoughts?
So I was going to say pretty much the exact same thing.
That'll save time then, won't it?
Right. I mean, I'm learning this in spades pretty much every day, that you've got to focus on meaningful use cases, no matter what type of deployment that you're doing, cloud, not cloud, whatever, hybrid. And the other thing that I think I learn this every single day, and I think it's absolutely critical, is when you deploy SharePoint and you introduce these new concepts to people, you need to focus on getting the job done. Not necessarily all the wonderful things you can do in SharePoint eventually. It's how do I get my job done today? How do I solve a business process that's really important to me? And really sticking with a problem that people have and solving that with your new solution goes enormously towards getting people to say, oh my God, what else can I do with this platform? Get the job done, focus on meaningful use cases, and adoption stops being such a scary thing.
That's excellent points. Okay, so that's about all the time that we have. If you would like to hear more about migration, adoption, real-world SharePoint issues, both Susan and Eric will be speaking at the upcoming SP TechCon in Boston from September 16th to 19th. You can find out more about the conference by going to sptechcon.com and learning all about it. Eric, of course, is a vice president at Concatenate, a Canadian-based consultancy. Susan runs Susan Hanley LLC, her own consultancy. You can find them both on the internet and reach out to them if you have further questions. At this point, I would say thank you both very much for doing our initial Google Plus Hangout. And so a few little technical issues aside, I think we gave everybody some good information. So thanks for participating. Everybody who's listening in, thanks so much. I'm Dave Rubenstein saying thanks for joining us, and so long for now.